Hello, I'm David R. Jones of the Community Service Society. Welcome to the Urban Agenda. Mayor Bloomberg has won re-election, and there are many implications for the working poor and people of color in New York City. Joining me today are two keen observers and longtime friends of CSS, Dr. John Flateau, director of the Dubois Bunche Center for Public Policy at Medgar Evers College, and Angelo Falcon, president of the Institute for Puerto Rican Policy. Welcome to the Urban Agenda.
It's nice to be here.
Well, what does this election mean for African Americans and the Latino community from your perspective? Where does this go? I'll start with you, John.
Well, I think there's one sleeper issue that we need to address, and that is what I call the demobilization of the electorate. The one issue I think a lot of people aren't talking about is that there were only 1.2 million folks that voted in the election, and there are 4 million registered voters in New York City. And turnout has been going down, even more so in Black and Latino communities in this November election that just passed. So I think that's one of the issues that not only communities of color, but New York City needs to come to terms with. Why is there such a massive decline in voter participation in critical elections like electing the next mayor who can affect our communities, our neighborhoods, and a city council?
Angelo, what is your take?
Well, along with that, I think the problem is how people are interpreting the election results in terms of its implications, in terms, for example, particularly in terms of the future of the Democratic Party. As many people know, the Hillary Clintons and others are talking about making the party more competitive for the next presidential election, and that means moving it more to the right. And the question is, what does that mean in terms of the agendas of Black and Latino communities? So that will this election serve as another example of the need to do that? And then what does that mean in terms of the Democratic Party and the issues that weren't really addressed in this election? And it's possible will never be addressed by people in the Democratic Party unless our communities get mobilized and start holding that party more accountable.
The difficulty, obviously, as you've addressed it, however, if the Democratic Party decides that it doesn't want to get into hard issues that deal with the poor or people of color, how do you mobilize the base? Where is the fire that's going to bring out the large numbers of voters?
Another critical issue that you've really touched on here is message and issues. And I think that's one of the reasons for the demobilization for nearly 3 million voters. I'm not talking about people that aren't registered to vote yet. 3 million people almost on the rolls that decided, for whatever reason, they weren't going to come out. And I think part of the argument is that the mayor, with his tremendous resources, made it look like the election was over before Election Day, so that a lot of people might have stayed home. But I think the issue you touched on, that issues that resonate in working communities, people are not really speaking to, and I don't think either campaign strongly did that, which is one of the reasons why people aren't home.
What about the issue of the media? Maybe I'm just too close to this issue, but I saw the media steering the election in a way that was pretty ham-fisted. I mean, in terms of what issues they would allow to emerge in the press. They seem to be tilting very heavily towards the incumbent, not showing any bad news kind of thing. Is that just an insider's perception? I don't know. How is it felt and perceived in the Latino community?
Well, I know when you talk to political activists in the Latino community, whether they like Ferrer or not, felt that the coverage was very biased against them. I mean, I think part of the problem also, and it links up, is the issue of the polling as well, which is very much also a media creation. And it became clear, were the polls, for example, reflecting the reality or creating the reality for voters to the point where they made it seem like this election was a done deal, it's really not worth coming out to vote. So it becomes a real question, because I think right now part of the accountability that should come as a result of the election is an accountability in terms of the polling organizations. Well, clearly, in terms of the Latino part of the vote, they've already admitted that they really didn't know what they really weren't reading the Latino vote well. One pollster, one of the prominent pollsters, said, in fact, there was a Latino upsurge in the voting, and that's what threw us off. But the reality is that, as John said, the turnout rate of registered voters in the Latino and Black communities was about 28%. In white communities, it was like about 37%. Overall, it was like 31, 33% overall. Right. That's outrageous that so few people participate. And those are people who are registered. If you included everybody who's 18 and over who is eligible, then very a small number of people really participated in this process. So what the whole talk about, is this a mandate for the mayor? I don't know when so few people in the city actually participated in the process.
John?
I think the mayor tactically did what he was supposed to do to win the election. But campaigns are art and science, and it's not all about how many TV ads can you buy. And I think true campaigning has become a lost art in this town, and the strong suit of the traditional Democratic Party has gone by the wayside. They're trying to compete in terms of how many TV ads can they buy, how many consultants can they use. The amount of money you're paying a consultant to sit in your office for a month, you can have 25,000 posters on the street blanketing communities that you think resonate with your candidacy and your issues. And I saw very little of that going on, so I don't blame it all on the media. I think candidates have to take the initiative in communicating in a multi-level strategies for communicating to voters.
But it was also a troops issue, and were the unions out there in large numbers? I mean, the Democratic Party has always prided itself on street operations and pulling operations.
Right.
Did that happen?
Didn't happen.
Didn't happen.
Didn't happen.
No, I mean, the unions were all over the place on this. Even, the kinds of money that the Democratic Party, for example, was putting into our communities was very little. As John mentioned, this high-tech kind of approach, which everybody buys into, is really a problem, because it really serves not to reach our communities, because our communities are you have this kind of detached kind of thing. I mean, it also the way it gets trivialized. I mean, Al Sharpton dancing salsa, when it was a broader message, and so that stuff gets spinned in a way that really makes the process seem so far away from the average voter.
I don't know what that media buy was, but I can tell you $100,000 on election day with a bona fide get out the vote operation can turn out thousands of voters. Let me just give you a number here. 1.2 million people voted on November 7th, 2005. In the Dinkins-Giuliani wars, the 89 and 93 elections, there were turnouts of 1.8 and 1.9 million voters in this town with a smaller electorate.
Right.
New York City's population is at an all-time high right now. So that means voter interest is on the decline. Voter participation is on the decline.
Okay, let's move from the election to how the political landscape starts to lay itself out now. Obviously, the city council still remains, if anything, even more strongly Democratic than it was. How does the government now come together? How do the interests of communities of color, of working people, how do they get played out through the screen of a mayor who got elected by a large margin and a council that's overwhelmingly dominated by Democrats?
Well, I think one of the questions right now is that there needs to be an agenda, an urban agenda, like David Jones and CSS has on the table as they're playing out the decision to elect the next speaker of the city council. There should be an agenda, a policy agenda, against which those council members who are representing the working poor in this city, communities of color, are saying these are the issues that the next leader of our council, of this legislature, needs to represent and sign on to if we're going to pick you as speaker, because that's the individual that has to go head-to-head with the mayor, the chief executive in this town, and decide where $45 billion a year is going to go, where the resources are going to go. We want to see that come into our community. And so far, I haven't seen that agenda approach surfacing, and they're only, 45 days away from electing the next
some
speaker.
of us fear, obviously, that the takeaway message that we've been talking about actually is let's run away from these issues entirely, because we want to focus on the centrist message, sort of become the sort of local Clinton, what Clinton did with the White House.
But that would be hard, I think, for many people in the city council, because, I mean, their constituencies are right there. Those are the things that are hitting them straight in the face. The question is, in terms of the leadership, what's going to happen there? I'm not particularly clear. One of the problems I had, for example, during the race itself, was that I didn't see, for example, a Latino agenda emerging. and that we have all these organizations.
Right.
And one serious problem we have is that in the past we've had to rely on our nonprofit, community-based organizations to do a lot of this work and to provide that alternative leadership. But today,
CSS.
we notice that more and more of these organizations basically have become extensions of government.
They are.
So very cautious about the kinds of things they promote out there. And even in terms of even working together, it becomes more difficult when you're competing for contracts. So sometimes you have to be careful that when we talk about an agenda, that it doesn't just deteriorate into an agenda of, well, give us a budget issue, give us more money and we'll do the right thing. I think the kind of thing John is talking about, I know, is one of really dealing with these real serious issues. For example, the issue of residential segregation and its impact in terms of schools, in terms of people's health, not an issue that was discussed at all. When they talk about affordable housing, not really dealing with the reality of people who can't afford what they're talking about, and the mayor's plan basically not addressing the issues of our communities. People kind of dealt with these issues very much on the surface, but the messages were confused. I mean, again, going back to the election, in terms of Ferrer, one of the things that I found very strange was I didn't understand what he was doing. During the primaries, when blacks and Latinos were overwhelmingly the majority of the Democratic Party electorate, he was talking about the middle class. Then when he goes into the general election, which is, I think, still majority white, he gets real Puerto Rican. He starts going to Puerto Rico. I didn't know what was going on, so that throws people off in terms of, you know, what is it that we focus on.
For those of our viewers actually who want to participate in some of these discussions, Community Service Society has created a blog, which I didn't even know what a blog was until a couple of months ago. But it's a way for you to communicate your views on these and ask other questions. It's called turnstile.cssny.org. You can go on it. We're going to have many of the people here, or the two people here participating in it, and many others. But we have to find mechanisms to have this discussion on a much more profound level, obviously, going forward.
Yes. But I think some of the issues did emerge in the campaign. The items that Angelo just mentioned, affordable housing, that has to be very near the top of the agenda. Improving our public schools, while the lower grades are improving. I mean, one of the issues Ferrer put on the table that was not contested really was the high school dropout rate. So we're only at the very early stages of improving our public school system.
Okay. We'll be right back to continue the urban agenda.
Don't walk. Don't walk. Walk. Do not enter. Hot dogs. Definitely like hot dogs. Motorcycle club. Everything must go. Ghostly ghouls. Don't look at that, Teddy. Body piercing. Ouch.
Everyday moments can become teaching moments because learning starts long before school does. Give your child the start they need at bornlearning.org.
We're discussing the significance of Mayor Bloomberg's reelection with Dr. John Flateau of Medgar Evers College and Angelo Falcon from the Institute for Puerto Rican Policy. Let's talk about another thing that the press seems to be harping on, that the notion of racial politics is dead in the city of New York. This election is a watershed, that now other things are more important. Are ethnic politics, are racial politics dead in the city of New York? John?
I don't think it's dead, but I think that Mayor Bloomberg did a masterful job of overriding the issues of race and ethnicity with class issues. I mean, one of the recent articles that came out talked about his scientific polling operation that was able to parse out what issues resonated with which blocks of voters. And so he was able to ride that wave. But I don't think race and ethnicity are dead quantities in the political calculus here. I think Fernando Ferrer did not have the resources, I think didn't move early enough in terms of mobilizing a base of vote around that issue. But I think class is a very strong issue that can very easily override race and ethnicity, and that's what we saw happening in this election.
Angelo, you take the same take?
Well, you know, I think the thing is that the two things are so intertwined in this city. It's really hard to separate them, and when you do separate them, you lose quite a bit. And I think the reality is, for example, is while we're talking about a post-tribal politics, is one term that people like to use, in terms of the Latino vote, The Latinos voted
where they were.
They voted where they were. In fact, Bloomberg lost ground with the Latino vote.
Right.
What was interesting in terms of the black vote, and there you can have different interpretations about why that happened. That it wasn't so much a pro-Bloomberg vote, it may be a kind of a protest vote against Fed.
Well, let me point out, and I think it ties into your question. That's where the ethnicity played in. You have to break down the black vote. There is no monolithic black vote,
No,
and there's no monolithic Latino vote.
Right.
Caribbean American voters voted more for Bloomberg, if you look at the results, than African American voters. African American voters tended to vote more for Ferrer in the general election.
Ideologically, West Indian voters have traditionally been much more conservative on a whole range of issues, economic issues
as
particularly.
Latino voters, it's interesting, in Queens, for example, Central South America is also more conservative. But in general, what I saw was when I spoke to Latinos, regular folks, not the activists, people were saying, look, I'm going to support one of our own. And the thing is that it's interesting because people are trying to talk over that reality as opposed to understanding that reality, and that could blow up in their faces in the future. So that's one of the things that's interesting about the way this is playing
There's also an argument that the people were voting for competence and they're not convinced that the Democrats are competent. What's our takeaway on that?
I think that the mayor did make headway on that issue.
Right.
He managed to get control, for example, in the educational arena. He said that was going to be the centerpiece that people should test him on, and he had some preliminary results in to say that he seems to be making headway in that direction, and I think he capitalized on that issue. On the other hand, I think that African American, Caribbean, Dominican, Puerto Rican, Korean, Chinese American, these are all categories that lock into certain kinds of issues as well. There are large immigrant blocks in this town that nobody's either talking about. Some are registered, but a tremendous amount of them are not registered and voting yet, but they have a whole range of issues that have not hit the table yet, and that's 40% of New York's population.
And the competence issue with the Democrats, it's a real one in the sense that they also have to be careful what kind of message they put out there. And the idea of a critique of, just presenting a critique of existing policies without really presenting or clearly presenting, alternatives or ways to address them becomes a problem, especially when you're going up against a mayor who not only is an incumbent, has all sorts of resources to put out there. I'm not just talking about his own money. I'm talking about as an incumbent, and has the money to put out the message. He had enough money to take something that was very mundane that he was doing and make it seem like it was a major policy breakthrough. And I thought that's something that someone like Fajed just didn't have the money to do.
Community Service Society does a poll every year, polling low-income New Yorkers. And in the last poll numbers that were done in August, we showed the sharpest increase in poverty statistics we've ever seen. People facing multiple hardships, and that means they were about to be evicted, they lost utilities, they couldn't fulfill a prescription or go to a doctor. That kind of thing.
The Census Bureau data released backed that up as well, that poverty is on the rise in New York
And
City.
people were, overwhelmingly said they felt that the city was going in the wrong direction. But the same thing that we were talking about, actually, our polls seemed to verify some of the outcome, showed that this was also the sharpest drop in their intention to participate in the election. And what that's about, whether they've given up on political action. I know when, Richie Perez of our staff was still alive and registering, he was running into steady problems, particularly among younger African American and Latino young people who came of voting age but refused to participate because they thought it was a crock.
See, and that's to me, that's a dangerous thing for an urban democracy, to have huge numbers. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, whether you're talking about immigrants. And by the way, if they're eligible enough to die for our country, legal immigrants in this country should have the right to vote. That's my position, and they don't in this town. The other huge
Even the Roman Empire used to give citizenship.
That's right. And apparently we granted posthumously to family members after an immigrant goes and dies for our country. So I think that's one huge block, and the other is formerly incarcerated who are in
Right.
this town, who all are coming back here, and their right to vote has been removed. So this is part of that hundreds of thousands of adults walking around in New York City who are struggling, part of the economy, and if we don't connect them to the body politic, to the policy and decision making in this town, we've got
But I think we can't let the
potentially
Democratic
explosive-
Party off the hook
no,
entirely. I mean,
absolutely not.
they set this thing up pretty badly. I mean, this was the end of the old machine politics. We haven't seen particularly a lot of vision,
Well,
by
I
and
think
large,
part
coming
of the
out.
problem, though, I think, is we have to connect what John was just talking about this demobilization and the exclusion of whole sectors of folks, people of color overwhelmingly, and the fact that there's this gentrification, this kind of return of this white professional class to New York, where the idea now is, look, let's preserve white privilege. Quite frankly, I mean, who's running City Hall? Who's running Wall Street? Who's running the media, the main media? At a time when the population is over 2/3 Black, Latino, Asian, and that should be presenting different issues in terms of governance, those things are being delegitimized. You can't even bring them up in the media.
And a good example of this, we have this new decision at the Court of Appeals level on CFE, on the education equity. No one went and filibustered up in Albany when they didn't pass the money that was supposed to have been coming down to the city of New York. If this had been virtually anything of that magnitude that affected another population, they would have shut the legislature down until a compromise was reached. But both the Democrats and Republicans colluded and didn't make this the critical issue.
Our legislators need to wake up, those representing our communities, and those we in these communities need to hold our representation more accountable. And that's why I keep going back to demobilization, because that's letting a lot of people off the hook. It's letting a decision-making process off the hook when you have millions of adults in this town, in New York City, in our neighborhoods, who aren't holding their political leaders accountable.
Just to mention to our audience again, if you want to participate in this kind of dialogue, I hope you come to our new blog, which is turnstile.cssny.org, to participate. One of the things that I think is probably the hope of other rich, non-minority, prospective candidates for mayor is that there's a major division and rift that's developed over this campaign between African Americans and Latinos. Do you think this is happening, Angelo? Do you think?
I wish I saw some energy. I don't see any energy for a marriage or a divorce.
We don't have to worry about it.
No, yeah, I think it's a false issue. For example, the New York Times wrote articles talking about this big division between Dominicans and Puerto Ricans. Didn't happen.
Didn't happen.
I mean, these are white folks writing about us from the outside, and to me, it's more wishful thinking than anything else. Listen, the rough and tumble of New York City politics, the relations between blacks and Latinos, and within the black community, within the Latino community, is part of an ongoing process of people. I mean, there are constant coalitions that are being made, broken apart. It's almost like a family.
And it's a moving train too, because right now I can tell you for a fact that Black, Latinos, Asians, and women, white women in this town, are coming together around this issue of minority and women business development. There's a very critical piece of legislation that the mayor and the council are negotiating right now that will hopefully put into law access for minority and women businesses to $10 billion a year in municipal procurement. There is no policy issue on the books right now. So, and I know that there are coalitions, cross-racial, cross-ethnic, going on around that issue right now. At the same time that people want to focus on politics and whether this black politician is talking to that Latino politician. So those are false issues.
Just one closing note. What is your takeaway, Angelo, that you think the audience should be thinking about going forward in terms of how the political landscape will shape itself?
Well, I think, for example, within the Latino community, one of the issues that I'm very concerned about is that we've ceded too much authority for setting the agenda to elected officials, that we really need a much more diverse leadership. You know, when I look at black leadership and I see well, I see reverends, I see other kinds of leaders there.
Right.
What irks me in the Latino community is that it's almost 100% these elected officials. And that gets kind of strange because then it's hard to hold them accountable. There aren't any kind of real debates going on. And that's a major challenge for us in terms of creating different kinds of institutions, generating a new type of leadership, trying to figure out what to do with this nonprofit sector that has been so important in the past that needs to be kind of reoriented in a way that it makes it more aggressive, and really getting people, other people in the community that should be playing more of a leadership role, be more aggressive to do that. Sometimes we're very short-sighted in our thinking, and we cede a lot of power to a lot of people that shouldn't have it.
Yes,
John, very briefly.
I would say one other area we haven't touched on, I think there's a generation gap, particularly in the black community. There's a huge disconnected, very talented population under 40, 45. A lot of them are professionals who are living right in these neighborhoods, and they're feeling disconnected from the political process. And our aging black political leadership needs to make room and figure out ways to re-engage the next generation in the political process.
My thanks to Dr. John Flateau, director of the Dubois Bunche Center for Public Policy at Medgar Evers College, and Angelo Falcon, president of the Institute for Puerto Rican Policy. I'm David R. Jones of the Community Service Society, and thank you for watching The Urban Agenda. To learn more about the work of the Community Service Society of New York or to comment on the Urban Agenda, please contact us at 212-614-5425 and on the web at www.cssny.org.